Hello and welcome to Inside Exercise. I'm Emeritus Professor Glenn McConell from Melbourne in Australia. The brief of Inside Exercise is to bring to you the absolute who's who in exercise metabolism, exercise physiology, and exercise and health. And the idea here is to bring it to the masses, but also have some rigor, right? So I think it should appeal to all sorts of people interested in exercise. What we're doing here today is interviewing Bret Goodpaster. He is from Advent Health in Florida. He's a total expert in insulin resistance and the role of the mitochondria, etc. But he's also done a lot of work on aging and exercise. Okay, so the brief today is to talk about all sorts of things around that, but in particular, can exercise slow the aging process? Okay, so Bret's a great guy. I've known him for many years. We both went to Ball State University in Indiana many years ago. He's actually training for a Ironman 2 weeks after this interview, his second Ironman. And interestingly, he's doing it with Scott Trappy, who is the current director of Ball State University. And he will be coming on in a little bit to talk about exercise in space. So enjoy. Today I have with me Bret Goodpaster from Florida. How are you, Bret?
Doing well, Glenn. Thanks.
Great, great. So we've known each other for a while now. We both went to Ball State University in Indiana. Yep. And yeah, so Bret's been doing some great work. His main focus has probably been around the mitochondria, fat metabolism, etc. But he's also done a whole bunch of that in regards to aging, yeah?
Yep.
All right, cool. So we're going to talk about aging and exercise, but I guess focusing on, does exercise slow the aging process? So what do you reckon? Does it?
I think it does. I think that's the sort of the punchline here, but you know, it gets a lot more complicated when you start drilling down on specific questions about, you know, exercise and certain, you know, effects on certain body systems and organs. So I think it's a more complicated answer than just, yeah, it slows aging.
Yeah. So why don't we even just straight off the bat say, you know, we're talking about exercise, are we talking about physical activity, just sort of, you know, exercise in daily life, or do you think to have these effects, you really need to be sort of doing, you know, exercise, like, you know, getting your heart rate up and all that?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I certainly think there's, you know, a lot of benefits just, you know, to stay physically active, you know, gardening, you know, just walking, staying generally active. But I do think there are likely specific effects of structured exercise that you won't see with just, you know, normal physical activity. Yeah. Of course, a lot of it depends on, you know, where your starting point is, right? I mean, if you're, you know, if your functional level is really low, you know, maintaining just normal physical activity is probably really important. But I do think there's a distinction between, you know, physical activity as we think about it and structured exercise.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So talking about the level, so I noticed, so as I mentioned elsewhere, Bret's written a chapter for the ebook we've got coming out on exercise metabolism. And I noticed in there you were talking about the METs. So, you know, the metabolic equivalence. So 1 MET is your basal metabolic rate. And you said something in there about something like, is it 5 METs? It's kind of like a cutoff. So if you're really kind of inactive and you go up sort of 1 MET or 2 METs, you were saying you could reduce your risk of dying of all-cause mortality by 20% or something. Do you want to just sort of,
Yeah, I think the MET is, as you know, Glenn, is just another way to express fitness, right? Is, you know, aerobic capacity. Metabolic equivalence, resting metabolic rate times, you know, X as a MET level. And so, yeah, I think it's just another way to express, you know, maximal aerobic capacity or fitness.
Yes, but with that, there was this idea that obviously the lower, like you were touching on there, the lower your fitness to start with. So there's something like, I think 5, if you've got like 5 METs, you're kind of at the level of frailty. And if you just do enough exercise, even just to increase that a little bit, which is still like, you know, it's not like they've got to go out and get like this huge VO2 max or something.
Right, right, right.
reduce the frailty and reduce the all-cause mortality. So right across the gamut, it's
yeah, and I think, you know, the epidemiology would indicate that there's a pretty strong relationship between fitness and all-cause mortality and cardiovascular related mortality. But I think you hit upon another area which is really interesting in aging, and that is this concept of physiological reserve that relates to fitness, right? I mean, we often think, you know, coming from the exercise, you know, physiology field, it's all about, you know, maximal, you know, VO2 peak or VO2 max and maximal cardiac output and fitness related to performance, which I not taking anything away from that. It's true. But I think there's this concept around physiological reserve that relates to you know, maximum exercise capacity that's also really important. And I use the example of data that we've seen recently in our aging studies that's really compelling. And so basically what we see, so we measure an older person's VO2 max or maximal cardiorespiratory fitness. You know, typically their values are, you know, for normal, you know, non-exercising older people, they're fairly low, right? Their fitness is fairly low. And then when you measure their energy expenditure or their VO2 during their just sort of normal walking, their activity of daily living, sort of normal walking speed, as it turns out, their normal preferred walking speed is about 65% of their VO2 peak. And for you and I, 65% of our VO2 peak that's structured exercise, right? I mean, that's a brisk, you know, it's not high interval intensity interval training, but it's not trivial in terms of the intensity. So that tells me that some of these older people who have low fitness, you know, just walking around the grocery store, they're exercising at a pretty high percentage of their peak, which is, you know, so they're really, their reserve capacity beyond that is not much, right? They're working, in other words, they're working at a pretty high percentage of their reserve capacity.
And if they can put that up a little bit by doing some exercise, even if it's, you know, walking or I mean, probably the more the better.
Exactly.
They've got a big
right. And that's the important argument too, right? Because you'll hear people say, well, who cares what your maximum is, because you're never working out at your maximum.
Which is true in younger, in anyone like a young athlete or whatever, it's true, right? But
it's true, but if some of these older people are, you know, functioning on a day-to-day level, walking across the street at 70% of their VO2 peak, that's really important because, you know, it relates to their metabolism. You know, are they burning glucose? Are they burning fat? You know, are they becoming more fatigued because
they actually even have are their lactates up when they're walking? I never thought.
Well, we don't know. You would assume that they wouldn't be really high, but does that relate to fatigue, right? I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Normally you wouldn't think lactate would be up, but if you're, I mean, you see it all the time, right? People walking, they got to sit and have a rest. You know, you go for walking, you go for a trek, you know, like just to a, I don't know, national park or something. Even younger people, they have to stop and have a rest, and it's because they're so unfit.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
and I know we might talk about it later, but does that tie into their, you know, motivation, you know, to exercise or not, right? So
so that's kind of metabolic fitness. They sort of talk about that a bit as well, is that, I guess, because you could be, because, you know, going back to that thing, which I totally agree with, you know, even people that are quite young and fit, you would say the VO2 max isn't the be all and end all, right? Even though it's obviously important for all sorts of things, you're not always at your VO2 max, but you'll say, well, you need your metabolic fitness. So, you know, that's why, you know, going for a walk or whatever, which is obviously applicable for older people as well, is improving your metabolic fitness. but it's not really improving your VO2 max, because your VO2 max is maximum cardiac output.
That's right.
Oxygen extraction, whatever. Yeah. So
Or maybe it makes it easier to function at a higher percentage of that peak, right? Maybe your reserve capacity is a little better.
Yeah. All right. So in terms of slowing, does exercise slow aging, etc.? I guess you start thinking about, well, do you live longer with exercise? Which I think we know the answer to that, but if you just expand on that a little bit. But also there's the lifespan versus the health. There's a term that's become a bit more prevalent nowadays, which is the health span. So how much of your life are you actually healthy, even if you're not living longer? But my assumption would be that exercise, I guess endurance exercise in particular, for lifelong endurance exercise would increase your lifespan and your health span. So what proportion of your life that you're healthy? Is that am I getting that?
I think both are true. Even rodent studies, I think, have shown that exercise doesn't necessarily increase maximal lifespan, but I think the data in humans are fairly compelling that lifelong exercise does increase lifespan. It's sort of cross-sectional data for the most part, but nonetheless, I think the data are pretty compelling. I think it's more clear that exercise, increases this health span, which is essentially, living, having sort of healthy aging or living healthy long, for a longer period of your life. I've heard it described to me, by some that we want to live sort of the square wave of life, right? You want to be healthy, and then just
then suddenly fall off,
and then just suddenly go, right?
Exactly.
Rather than this just sort of steady, prolonged, protracted decline, right?
Yeah, and that's the
I
thing.
think that's what healthy aging, health span is.
Yeah, and that's the thing that's probably really gone astray, right? Because we are living longer and longer, but we've also got less activity. People are less active, but they're living longer. So you've got a longer period, and you even think about the effect on the keeping people alive, and just the cost of all the medical interventions and things. Now people are living longer, but they're not actually healthy, so they're actually sick longer.
Well, yeah, I agree, and it's probably a topic for another day, but I certainly see that what's tied into this concept is how the obesity epidemic is going to affect all this. I don't even think we've seen that yet, right? Because it's a fairly recent phenomenon, right? I mean, in the past few decades, and I don't think we've really have seen the effects of the obesity epidemic on lifespan and certainly health span. I mean, there's a lot of data indicating, obviously, that obesity is associated with, mortality and morbidity. But in terms of at a population level, I think I'm not optimistic what we're going to see.
And on top of that is layered on top of that probably is the less activity, physical activity as well, because all the kids nowadays. So when you and I were growing up, we didn't have iPhones and I didn't have a laptop. I didn't even see a laptop till I was like starting my undergrad. I hadn't used a computer until I started my undergrad. So
me too. Yeah.
Now it's just phones and computer games and whatever. So we're going to have the obesity epidemic on top of the physical inactivity epidemic. Oh, okay. Depressing. But anyway, so we got to try and turn that around, eh? So I guess that's
exercise is the way out, right?
Yeah. So the whole psychological, aspects of it. So I have some people on in the future to talk about how do we actually get people to exercise. But you and I try and show the evidence that exercise does this and this, but then it's a matter of people actually then doing it.
Well, that's what I tell people as well. As and you just sort of said it, the type of research that you and I have done around exercise is really kind of efficacy research, right? Which is basically, if you do the exercise, what are the effects? That's what we're interested in, right? I think it's an entirely different field of study to see what, how to get people to exercise, or more people to exercise. But that's not really what and that's really important, but that's not what I
No, neither
do.
And sometimes we suffer because of that. I don't know about you guys, but here with our grinding bodies, you write this grant, all this beautiful mechanisms and everything. And they say, and sometimes you'll get a reviewer, it's becoming less, but they'll say, oh, that's all very well, but how are you going to get them to exercise? And it's like, well, that's not what I'm focusing on here. But
or you'll get the reviewer that says, well, we know exercise is good for you, so why do we care?
Yeah, why do we need?
We just got to get more people to exercise.
Exactly. Hey, so just thinking about the exercise. So I know you've done a lot of research on, endurance type exercise, resistance exercise. I guess you could have sprint exercise, but you don't see too many older people out sprinting. So what, can you talk a little bit about the different types of exercise and the effects on aging? So I guess, muscle mass, maintaining muscle mass, etc.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of, interesting work, that's been done and ongoing, about this. And I think for me, a couple of interesting almost fallacies are, one, that aerobic exercise doesn't do anything to muscle mass, which I think in terms of increasing muscle mass or hypertrophy, that's absolutely true. I mean, well, maybe that's a little strong, but for the most part, that's true. But what I think doesn't get appreciated as much is potentially the ability of endurance exercise to prevent the loss of muscle as people age. And then, our work going back, almost 20 years now shows that, and this is from, population epidemiology studies showing that muscle mass per se is really not as important as what we used to think. Really, it's about strength and muscle quality. That's really more important than muscle mass. So, when people talk to me about maintaining muscle mass, although I think it's certainly important, I think it's much more important to focus on maintaining muscle quality and strength.
Okay, so strength is, obviously people know what strength means. But what do you mean by muscle quality? Are you talking even about, intramuscular fats and things like that, or?
Well, I think those things are related, but I guess muscle quality in the strict sense would be, per muscle, per amount of muscle mass, how does your muscle function, right? So it's almost like strength per unit mass.
Okay, so the intrinsic strength. And how is that affected by aging, and how does exercise affect that?
Well, we've shown that, and these are longitudinal aging studies that we've done, in the health, aging, and body composition studies, showing that these men and women in their 70s lose about 0.5% per year of muscle mass, but the loss of strength is about 1.5 to 2% per year. So it's about 3 times greater than the loss of muscle mass. So so what we see is there's a much more accelerated loss of muscle quality and strength than we see in mass.
Okay, so that becomes a bit more complicated as well. Like, how much of that do you think is because, as you know, when you do weight training, you get the adaptations with hypertrophy, but you also get the motor control, the recruiting the fibers and things. How much of that do you think might be outside of the muscle, and how much, do you know what I mean? Like, how much of it is motor control and sort of?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. When we talk about muscle quality, we really don't know if it's intrinsic to the muscle. Is it motor recruitment, or even central command, right? I mean, then you get into motivation and brain health, and link to muscle, and
So one thing I did want to bring up was the interesting thing I think is really interesting is how you tend to lose with age your fast. So people may not know, but you've got sort of your aerobic slow type muscle fibers, and you've got your fast twitch, which are your more sprint type muscle fibers. They tend to fatigue quicker. Slow fibers fatigue less. And I've always found it interesting that with age, you tend to lose your fast muscle fibers, your fast motor units, more than your slow. So how does that sort of impact on things? So that would, in terms of force production. and I guess they can't slow that down, right? You can't slow down your loss of fast fibers by exercising, can you?
Yeah, I think it's somewhat controversial about the loss of the selective loss of fast fibers, but assuming you are losing fast fibers, I think it certainly has implications and it's probably related to, first of all, you're not recruiting those fibers day to day if you're not, doing forceful contractions to recruit or train those fibers. And I don't think you'd get a lot of arguments from many that would be a reason that you're losing those fibers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, so maybe, okay. So just to unpack that a little bit. So I guess I'm maybe not up on that. So it's not that clear with aging that you lose your fast fibers preferentially now?
I think it's still somewhat controversial. Yeah.
Okay.
And, as you know, Glenn, there are this subclasses of type 2 fibers that makes it a little bit more complicated,
exactly.
right?
That's the thing, yeah. Well,
you've got the pure 2x, the 2x fibers, which healthy younger people don't really have much of the 2x fibers. They're type 2 fibers or the 2A fibers that are a little bit more aerobic, right?
Yeah. All right, cool. So, okay. So in terms of practicalities, I guess I could guess the answer. You'd probably say do some aerobic and some maybe strength type stuff as you age. Is that a fair thing to prescribe to people to do a mix?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the strength training is important, not only for muscle, but probably for bone as well. I mean, weight bearing exercise, whether it's walking, running, or strength training, is probably really important for bone health.
Throughout life as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. So not only muscle health, but no, and I think it's important to sort of go into old age, whatever we want to define as old age, as healthy as possible, right? With the healthy amount of muscle mass and frankly, I think it goes back to this concept of physiological reserve, right? You want to have some reserve capacity. You want to have enough muscle mass and reserve capacity. If you get injured or get sick, you can recover from this. And this is something that we don't think about very much. But typically what happens is, these older people will get some acute insult or injury, hospitalization, they decline in function, they lose muscle mass. And so this recovery from these acute insults or injuries, it becomes really, really important. And I don't think there's a lot of evidence, but it makes intuitive sense that if you don't have the reserve capacity to recover from these episodes, then it's going to result in a much more rapid decline on the back end of that. So,
well, yeah, I was thinking, two things. I was thinking how I'd seen you had some papers on, I think, people that broke their neck or femur or something like that. Am I getting that right? So people that have
that wasn't us.
Okay.
Well, I'm trying to think. Maybe
their bone, their muscle mass or whatever after operations. I thought I saw something about, maybe I had that wrong, but you can imagine, I guess, if someone's, the classic thing, an older person breaks their neck or femur, they're already frail. Yeah. They lose this muscle mass. You said that this reserve is probably really small already, and the prognosis for them is not good.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we did a study with some transplant surgeons back at the University of Pittsburgh, and it was interesting that we showed that muscle mass and muscle composition actually predicted mortality following liver transplant. So,
oh, wow.
I think this concept of physiological reserve and muscle mass relates to, well, in this case, liver transplantation. So these diseases and conditions that we don't normally think of.
Yeah, actually, that reminds me as well, and it fits in because you've done a lot of stuff with mitochondria. But I remember there's this stuff on people that had heart transplants, and their muscles were still mucked up. Their muscle, I think it was the mitochondria, but it was the sodium potassium pump, all sorts of things. So it just shows how integrated. This is something I wanted to sort of bring out somewhere, just how integrative it is. So I just wanted to touch on that a little bit. So, people would think, oh, okay, you know, if I get my grandma or my mother exercising or whatever, she's going to, like, you know, maintain her muscle. And that's what we've talked about. But, you know, exercise is so much more integrated than that. So, you know, so with their VO2 max, for example, which I know there's more to life than VO2 max, but increasing your cardiovascular function, it's going to happen with the exercise, but all sorts of other systems, right? It's so integrative. So, I mean,
Absolutely.
like, what about the immune system? This is not your area, but now we know that exercise, we're sort of putting an artificial barrier almost here and saying non-aged and aged people, we know exercise is good for your immune system. You know, if you do too much, it could be, you know, it can go like a flip over. But we know exercise is good for the cardiovascular system. We know that we're sort of, I am anyway, talking about aged, non-aged. It's a continuum, isn't it? Like, there's no reason to think exercise is good for cardiovascular health in a younger person. Why wouldn't it be in an older person? Unless, I guess, they've got a heart condition or something.
Yeah, no, I think it's an important, you know, topic for sure, because, and, you know, it sort of relates to the question of, you know, is it too late, you know, is it too late to exercise? And we see older people responding quite well to exercise, and you're really hard pressed to find any data showing that people absolutely don't respond to exercise at a certain age, right? Depends on what outcome you're looking at, but I'm sure, you know, you can find some improvement somewhere, because exercise is so sort of multipotent, right?
I totally agree. It reminds me of the classic, you know, for a while there, Claude Bouchard was saying, I think it was him saying this, responders and non-responders and all this sort of stuff with exercise. But when you actually go, and I think I've struggled to find any non-responders. So even if their VO2 max doesn't go up, for example, or something, they'll have lower lactate, or the RER will be lower, or something will be, you know, I think you struggle to find a non-responder. It almost makes no sense. You know,
oh, absolutely. And I think the exercise response variation is very real, right?
There is variation.
But who's to say that, you know, you put somebody on a 12-week exercise program and they don't respond very well? Well, you know, maybe it's the intensity, maybe they just need, you know, to exercise for a longer period of time.
Yeah.
Everybody's different, and this is the response variation. But I agree with you. I think, you know, the non-response is really a tough one for me to,
you wouldn't want that.
You know, I'm sure they, in the odd cases, they're out there, but, you know, it's,
you wouldn't want that to turn people, you know, sometimes people are wanting the easier solution or something. You wouldn't want someone to go out and they do a couple of runs. I'm not getting better. I'm a non-responder. You know,
right. Yeah. Well, I tried exercise. It doesn't work for me.
Yeah. Non-responder. That's a good one.
But maybe people do respond better to resistance exercise compared to endurance exercise, or vice versa, right?
And this actually fits well with some of the stuff you've done, where we're talking about, okay, the response of younger to older people to endurance or resistance. I know you've done stuff on that, and you said maybe that, you know, you might need double the volume or something in an older person. Is that right? Yeah. To sort of try and get the same. Because, you know, there are all sorts of, we haven't talked about it, but there's all sorts of things going on in terms of hormones and things as well.
Yeah.
So like an older man, for example, if they got lower growth hormone, lower testosterone, you know, maybe that's why they need more. I don't know. Like,
yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, maybe it takes more of an exercise stimulus. And, you know, we started talking a little bit about, you know, exercise and aging, and, you know, I think the concept of whether or not exercise, you know, can prevent or slow aging, I think that's a really broad sort of concept. It's probably specific to specific systems and even cell types or tissue types. I always bring in the example from our own data. You know, we've tested these masters athletes, you know, these aerobic athletes, right, who do, you know, competitive running races, cycling races, triathlons. When you compare their data to younger athletes, their maximal cardiac output is lower, their VO2 peak is lower. But when you look at their muscle biopsies and the amount of mitochondria in their muscle, and you take pictures of their muscle mitochondria, they're identical.
wow.
The older athletes have just as many mitochondria as the younger athletes. Their mitochondria are just as functional. So, but their cardiovascular system is clearly not as, as functioning as well, right? So again, I think it depends on what system you're looking at.
Yeah, well, I think that's really interesting. I remember reading stuff on that a while ago, because you can't really stop, like, as you age, your maximum heart rate goes down by about 1 beat per year. The old 220 minus your age. I mean, it may be, not exact, but you can't really stop that. So if your maximum cardiac output determines your VO2 max in a large part, so you can't really affect that. But in a way, as you get older, your cardiovascular function goes down, and training can reduce that, but can't prevent that. But it sounds like your periphery, your muscles, kind of adapt to, like that's the part that can keep it going as long as possible.
Yeah. Which, going back to your point, Glenn, about, matching the cardiovascular system to the periphery, I think this is really likely very important for patients too, like heart disease patients and even heart failure, et cetera, right? If their heart's not functioning as well, can they do exercise to essentially extract more out of what the muscle's being given, right?
Exactly. And I saw you've done something on, you just a little bit on nitrate, and you've done a few sort of interventions to try and get the most bang for your buck there. So I know you did something on that with aged people as well, right?
Yeah. We're actually doing some trials right now with oral nitrites and aging and metabolism.
Yeah. So the idea there is I guess, if you can get a little bit more, because there is some evidence with nitrate, but it's a bit, myself and others have not always found it, but the idea that you can maybe get a little bit more oxygen consumption, with the nitrates. So, increase your efficiency. So get a little bit more bang for your buck, so more output per unit of oxygen with nitrate.
Yeah.
So if they've got this oxygen sort of delivery problem, and they can get a little bit bang for the buck. So, and you've found that works.
Well, it's too early to tell right now, but I think some of the early results, because we're looking in muscle biopsies at the mitochondria function, and we're not unblinded yet, but so we'll see. We're working with, I don't know if you know Mark Gladwin, but he's one of the pioneers in oral nitrites and nitric oxide biology. Yep.
Just to circle around a bit, we haven't talked about it really, but you've done a lot of work on intramuscular fats and whether they relate to insulin resistance and things like that. And you're the sort of the man on this paradox that exercise increases intramuscular fat, but with an obese person they have increased intramuscular fat, and that's not a good thing. But with exercising, the intramuscular fat can be actually important for the exercise. Did you want to just talk a little bit? Might get a little bit complicated, but the fact that with aging and you're unfit, you're going to get increases in your intramuscular fat, especially if you're overweight, and that's a bad thing. When you exercise, you're going to get an increase in your intramuscular fat, which can be okay. So what actually happens in that sort of situation?
It's interesting. We had sort of two parallel lines of research going when I was in Pittsburgh working with David Kelly to understand, the pathobiology of insulin resistance and obesity and type 2 diabetes. And, we had done some studies in muscle composition, and we became interested in this phenomena that many, including groups in Europe and the US and Australia were finding with this, muscle triglyceride accumulation and insulin resistance and related to type 2 diabetes. And it was almost becoming dogmatic in the field that, muscle triglyceride accumulation was causal for insulin resistance, potentially even type 2 diabetes. But we knew from the exercise physiology literature that muscle triglyceride was a fuel source for exercising muscle. So we began to look at some of our athletes and just simply at the amount of muscle lipids stored, and as we hypothesized, it was actually higher. At least the triglycerides in muscle were higher, and this made total sense to us because it's a fuel source. It's almost like glycogen, right? They're storing this fuel source. They want to burn it for exercise. So we felt it was more about the flux of the lipid rather than the static pool of lipid itself that was likely important for insulin resistance and metabolic
Also the
disease.
composition of it, though. I mean, we know there's so many different types of triglycerides.
Yeah, right. So
actual-
that got us and others sort of going down the path of trying to identify some of these other lipid moieties or metabolites or other lipid species that were more likely causal for insulin resistance. And there's a lot of preclinical and even human literature out there suggesting that diacylglycerols, ceramides, other sphingolipids are seem to be more causal for insulin.
I was kind of asking for it, but we're probably getting a little bit complicated here. I guess just to bring it back a bit. So, if you're obese, inactive, you tend to have increased intramuscular triglycerides, which can be a bad thing for your mitochondrial function and maybe play a role in insulin resistance. But when you exercise, you get a normal sort of increase because you want to use it for metabolism. So what happens? What happens in your older exercise people?
Well, let me just say first, I'll get to the aging question here in a minute, but we also had done studies that showed that when obese people and normal weight lean people exercise, again, this muscle triglyceride is a fuel source. So even sedentary obese people, when you put them on an exercise bike and you have them exercise, just an acute exercise bout, they're clearly able to burn fat and they're burning muscle triglycerides. So for us, again, it was another clue that it wasn't the static pool of the muscle
turnover
in the cell. It was more about the metabolic flux and the fat metabolism. But anyway, so, and there are a lot of parallels, by the way, with obesity and aging too, that we see, that, these older people seem to accumulate, lipid in the muscle. Although, I mean, we did direct head-to-head comparisons of, older subjects and younger subjects and didn't really see a strong, aging effect per se. And this was another clue to us that there are probably, other factors than aging, like obesity and physical inactivity, that are driving some of these, kind of metabolic diseases, including insulin resistance and diabetes. And age per se didn't really show up. And the one study that we did never really got a lot of attention, although I think it was a really important study. We directly compared young versus old people in 3 distinct groups of subjects: athletes, obese, and normal weight people. And the insulin resistance was clearly determined by obesity and physical inactivity, but the old versus young subjects in each of those categories were identical. So there was no aging effect on insulin resistance.
Right. Wow. Okay, that's interesting. So bringing that together, I guess, with the muscle. So you're saying the muscle quality, therefore, is able to be maintained by exercise, and that is almost like not an issue for them. So as you age, obviously you lose muscle mass, but if you try and maintain that muscle, well, you're saying it's not necessarily the mass. So if you maintain the strength and the quality, it's almost like something else is going to get you. You know what I mean? Like the muscle is not not going to be the problem. Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
and I think, I think more holistically, maintaining a healthy weight for the amount of muscle mass you have is really, really important too, right? Many people in the obesity field don't think so much about obesity and physical function, but it's a really important, thing to think about, right? Certainly obesity is related to diabetes, type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease, but it's also related to mobility disability and osteoarthritis.
Exactly.
So simply just having too much weight on your frame is going to affect your physical function. And this is an important area that we don't always, I think, often enough appreciate.
Yeah, okay. And I've been actually meaning to get back to that, because we've talked, quite a lot about VO2 max, but activities of daily life are the critical things. If you think about an older person, I mean, they're all critical, but the ability to get out of a chair, the ability to carry groceries, go up a few stairs or whatever, are just massive. And for that, you're going to need, some reserve. So as you said, some aerobic reserve, but also the strength and the legs, the coordination.
Exactly.
So with the coordination, I guess it's making me think about falls. Yeah. So if people, older people fall and they can, break their hip and whatever. I'm assuming, well, I guess I know that exercise, depending on the exercise, I guess, is going to make that less likely. If you're stronger, you're less fragile.
Yeah, you would think. Not having said that, I'm not an expert in that area, and I don't know that data as well, but it makes intuitive sense, right? That if you're exercising, maintaining a healthy weight, it's going to relate to less falls and less injuries. So,
and I guess also we would all know. I was sort of thinking, why do I keep talking about broken neck of femurs? It's because I broke my neck of femur in a bicycle crash. So it's a little bit personal. So I said, why do I keep talking about that? So
right.
The interesting thing, and it actually ties back a bit, is that the doctors were surprised how quickly I responded. So I exercise quite a lot, almost every day. They were surprised how well I recovered from the whole thing. So from the operation, how quickly I came back. So it makes sense again. Well, I am kind of aged, right? I'm 50. I'm about to turn 60. But when
you had a good reserve capacity.
Exactly. So when I broke the neck of femur, I was like 50. But the point there is, it makes sense that if an older person, falls, breaks something, they're gonna. Now all of your homeostasis is better controlled when you're exercise. They're probably going to recover better. They're going to have more muscle mass, to handle that. Because you're going to lose muscle mass.
Yeah.
They'll have, more to start with. The higher aerobic capacity. I mean, it all makes sense. I guess we're back to just, we've got to get them to do it. It's the hard part.
That's right. Well, and I think you bring up another really interesting question about, exercise and aging, in terms of, can you completely prevent some of these aging effects, or can you just slow it? I think there's a lot of value in slowing aging, right? Slowing the sort of the steep trajectory of aging. Yeah. Because we're not going to live forever. Something, it's going to, things are going to deteriorate over time. I think, the best we can hope for is we're going to just slow the process a bit.
Yeah. So just I'll probably finish up soon, but just something that we keep sort of interchangeably. You can't really talk about exercise without talking about weight, and that we keep sort of coming back to that. So I guess a fair sort of question is, and I know you've done some research on this, is with aging and disease, the benefits of sort of, trying to maintain your weight. Okay, so if you're overweight, I know you've done studies looking at weight loss, dieting versus exercise versus both, etc. Do you have any comments around that? So if you had, I don't know, if your grandmother or whatever was overweight, obviously getting old, your parents or whatever, and and it's like, oh, do I diet? Do I exercise? Do I do both? I mean, do you have any thoughts around that?
I think, to sort of jump to the punchline, and we can talk a little bit more about it, but I think, having a safe and healthy weight loss is probably good for most older people if it's intentional. I mean, what you don't want to have happen is, sort of the unintentional weight loss caused by, cancer or something else that you can't control. But in terms of, intentional diet-induced weight loss, I think it can be healthy. It improves lipid profiles. It decreases blood pressure. But what's very clear to us through our research is that exercise is really the key to do superimpose with the weight loss, because
maintain your muscle mass. And
it maintains muscle mass. It actually improves your mitochondria function in the context of weight loss. It results in even greater improvements in insulin sensitivity and sort of cardiometabolic risk.
Yep.
So if you're going to lose weight, you got to do it with exercise. I mean, do it with diet, but certainly add exercise to the program.
I mean, I know I asked the question, I knew the answer, but it kind of drives you nuts when, you see all this stuff, lose weight now, with this program, like diet programs, no exercise needed. And it's like, well, even if you lose the weight, you're not going to get all the benefits of the exercise. You're going to lose your muscle.
That's right.
Yeah. So it's almost like, sometimes people think it's so complicated, like, like with food, often it's just have a normal mixed diet, with exercise, do I do weight loss? Do I do exercise? Do I do this? What percent max do I need to exercise at? Do I do high intensity intermittent, sprints, or do I do aerobic? And it's just like, do more than you do now, try and eat a little bit less, like it's not that complicated. I know there's a lot to look at and a lot to research, but it's just kind of logical.
Well, I mean, when people ask me what kind of exercise should I do, my answer is do the exercise that you will do.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. I mean, do something that you're going to stick with, you're going to enjoy. Look, it's easy for us to say, do, this prescription or incorporate resistance exercise. But I do think that for a lot of older people, there's probably some component of resistance exercise to, even just walking, right? Because it's weight bearing. So there's probably some benefits there that younger people don't really think about. Oh, you got to do strength training. So
the other thing people don't realize, I was just saying this to my daughter the other day, is, this thing about doing 10,000 steps a day, so is it a big thing in the US? It's a big thing in Australia. Try and clock up your 10,000 steps or whatever.
Yeah. It's sort of, I guess that's waned a little bit here. But 10,000 steps a day, people still talk about, people. Yeah. I mean, everybody's got a Fitbit or Apple Watch on, probably
exactly.
monitoring.
Well, I didn't even realize it was just my normal phone that does it for me. I didn't need to have a Fitbit. Yeah, but anyway, the thing I was saying to my daughter though is that, if you go for like a 6 kilometer, or I don't know, 4 mile run for Americans, 6 kilometer run.
Yeah.
People think that's amazing. You're going to be so fit, but they don't realize that 10,000 steps is about 6 kilometers. So
yeah.
Obviously it's not as hard aerobic, like cardiovascular wise, but you're actually clocking up roughly the same calories.
That's right.
Kilojoules, we're mixing metric and imperial. If you run 6 kilometers or walk 6 kilometers, so 10,000 steps. So that's the
right.
thing, back to sort of the metabolic fitness thing. If you don't want to be doing structured exercise, go out and do something. And, if you 6 kilometer run, people think that's amazing, which it is amazing. Well, it's amazing for me nowadays. But, yeah. Okay. Well, I don't know. Is there anything we haven't covered? I don't know.
I think we covered a lot of good stuff.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that pretty much covers it. So thanks again, Bret, for coming in.
Yeah, and, thanks, Glenn. It was fun.
It was fun. So thanks again, and I'll catch up with you next time.
All right, sounds good. Have a good day, Glenn. Thanks.
Okay. See ya.
Okay.
Bye.